Hello and welcome everybody to the second part of our Walk the Land series with tour guide Shulie Mishkin. It is my pleasure to be able to hand over to you, Shulie, for today's class.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Fishman. Hi, everybody. So last week we were in the north in Akko. This week we're going to stay in the north, but we're going to go to the east. Okay, last week we were on the coast. Akko is by the sea. We are going to go inland to Tzfat. We'll talk about the color blue in a minute. And we have a lot we want to accomplish in this hour. So please, if you have questions, if you have comments, I'd love to hear them. You can put them in the chat if you're worried you'll forget them, or you can wait till the end and then I will open up the floor to any questions and comments that you have. So we are going to be in Tzfat, right? Tzfat, the city of air. We'll talk about the air and the elements and why Tzfat is associated with air. But the blue is something that anyone who's ever been to Tzfat knows that blue is a color that you see everywhere, right? It's very much a motif in the old city. People paint their doors blue. They paint their window bars, right? Here you have a staircase, a stairway to heaven. Such a great photograph, painted blue. Why blue? Okay, so the blue takes off on the idea. The Talmud asks the question, why blue? Not about Tzfat, but about tzitzit, right? About the ritual fringes that the Torah commands us to wear. And you're supposed to have one that is a ptil tchelet, that is a blue. A tchelet is kind of like a sky blue. It's a particular color made from a certain kind of dye. And the Torah doesn't say why, but the Talmud, which loves to ask questions, says why? Why blue, right? Of all colors, why choose blue? And the answer is that the blue reminds you of the sea, and the sea reminds you of the sky, and the sky reminds you of God's throne, of the Kisei HaKavod, right? It's a color that kind of makes your consciousness go upward and puts you in a place where you're thinking about things that are more spiritual than the down-to-earth and the everyday. And that's a great introduction and theme for Tzfat, because that is Tzfat. Tzfat is not a place of the everyday. Sometimes distressingly so, right? They're not so good about things like parking and bathrooms, but it is a place of seekers, of spiritual searchers, of artists, and we're going to explore that. Okay. Last time people who were here last time, maybe I frightened some people off because I gave you a very big timeline. In Tzfat, I did not bring a timeline. We're going to take a look at some of the important people, but basically we're going to look at Tzfat's development over time, but there are two major periods that we're going to talk about. The most important one being Tzfat's golden age, which takes place in the 16th century. It's very short, maybe 50 to 75 years, but it has an enormous impact, not just on Tzfat, but on Judaism in general. So that's our main time period that we're going to talk about, the 16th century. We're also going to take a look at the mid-20th century at 1948 and the battles that happened in Tzfat, the British that were there before that. That's also going to be something we're going to be looking at. So that's just to give us a little bit of an introduction. Okay, so where are we? Always good to understand, right? So Tzfat, as we're going to see, we're going to talk about this, but Tzfat is up in the mountains. Okay, not terribly far from Tiberias and from the Sea of Galilee, from the Kinneret. It's only about a 45-minute drive, but it's very, very different elevation, right? Tiberias is very low, Sea of Galilee, Jordan Valley, right? We are very, very low, sea level and below sea level. When you take this windy road up here, you're going up into the mountains, and Tzfat is high above in the mountains, not far from Mount Meron. We're going to talk about Mount Meron is the highest peak in Israel, except for the Hermon Mountains all the way in the far north. So we are heading up to 1,000 meters above sea level, 1,200 meters above sea level. We're going very high. So Tzfat is up in the mountains. We are in the Galilee, what's called the Upper Galilee, just to place us in context of last week, right? Here's Akko. We were by the sea. So from Akko to Tzfat, not particularly far, right? You take your nice little Route 85, take you less than an hour, but two very different worlds. Akko by the sea, Tzfat up in the mountains. Galilee, the Upper Galilee, very picturesque, very beautiful, right? Green mountains all year round. green all year round, but also very significant in terms of Jewish history. Okay, we don't hear a lot about Tzfat in biblical times or in Second Temple times, but this area, not particularly Tzfat, but the Galilee in general, becomes super important after the Second Temple is destroyed, and especially after the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century of the Common Era, where Jerusalem, Judea becomes off limits to Jews, and much of Jewish life moves up north to the Galilee, to the Golan. And when we talk about the 16th century and the rabbis and the main figures of the 16th century, among them Rabbi Isaac Luria, the ARI, he's going to be harking back to this golden age of 2nd, 3rd, 4th century of the Common Era, when the major rabbis of the Mishnah, of the Talmud, are living up here in the Galilee. So we are located high up in the Galilee, very significant place in Jewish history, post-biblical Jewish history, right? Post-temple Jewish history. Okay, I debated if I should put this in the beginning or at the end. It would work either way. Anyone, by the way, who would like this, who would like a copy of this, you are welcome to send me an email and I will be happy to send it. I'm going to put my email in the chat if anybody would like it. I'm happy to send this to you, or if any other questions that you have. Okay, so this is a little bit of a Tzfat people and songs. We're going to be looking at different personalities. Most of them, everybody except for the first and the last, are from 16th century, okay? But the other two are also significant. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, right? He is the rabbi. We have Lag BaOmer coming up next week. Right? He's the rabbi of Lag BaOmer of Meron. Actually, this Tzfat is a very appropriate choice for this week. I didn't really think about it, but nice connection to Lag BaOmer. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the spiritual father of Jewish mysticism. Tradition ascribes the authorship of the Zohar, the major text of Jewish mysticism, to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Whether he wrote it or these are his traditions that were written down much later, in any case, he's a very significant figure in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, and certainly in Jewish mysticism. He's not living in Tzfat. There is no Tzfat in the 2nd century, but his impact is going to be felt on the Jews who come to Tzfat, okay, 14 centuries later in the 16th century. So that's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The next, all of the others, except for the last one, are all rabbis who, most of them were not born in Tzfat, but make their way to Tzfat at some point in the 16th century and have a huge impact on this kind of a Judaic revolution that happens in Tzfat. We're going to come back to most of them. Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, very significant Kabbalist teacher until the arrival of the next personality, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the ARI, who is the personality of Tzfat. And we're going to spend some time on him. Rabbi Shlomo Alkavitz, another important mystic and scholar. He's significant today. We remember him because he composed the Lecha Dodi, right, the centerpiece of our Friday night Kabbalat Shabbat service, which also comes from Tzfat. Okay? The others we're not going to talk about as much, but they're important to know about. Rabbi Moshe Alshich, an important commentator on the Bible. Rabbi Chaim Vital, a student of the ARI, who writes down the ARI's Torah. The ARI doesn't write his own ideas, but Rabbi Chaim Vital records them for him. And Rabbi Yaakov Berav, who is significant in the struggle for supremacy between Tzfat and Jerusalem. Not something we're going to get into so much now. Maybe we'll do a different Zoom lecture about that, but nice to know about. And Rabbi Yitzchak Abohav, we're going to talk about the Abohav Synagogue. He's the outlier here. He doesn't live in Tzfat. He doesn't live in the Galilee. He doesn't live in the land of Israel. He lives in Spain. He dies in Spain, but he is connected to Tzfat through the synagogue that is named for him. Maybe we'll talk about that. Okay, so that's our personalities that we're going to be referencing back. Where are we going to go? Okay, where are we going to go? We are spending our time in Tzfat in the old city. Okay, the new city of Tzfat some of which is from the 50s and 60s and is pretty dilapidated and ugly, some of which is much more recent, nice suburban parts like Mount Canaan. But all the new city of Tzfat is post-1948. The old city of Tzfat is pre-48, some of it going back to the 16th century. As we're going to see, quite a lot of the oldest stuff in Tzfat was destroyed because Tzfat is an epicenter of earthquakes. Okay, so we have a big earthquake every 100, 150 years or so. So some things are lucky and survive, some things don't, some things are buried under newer buildings. But we're going to be spending our time in the old city. Up until 1948, the old city was divided between the Jewish part, right, which is basically where the synagogues are today. Right? Just make this little dividing line, okay, more or less, right? Not exactly. Jewish part over here, okay, and the Arab part over here. In 1948, against all odds, the Jews take Tzfat and kick out the Arabs. There are 1,200 Jews in Tzfat. There are 12,000 Arabs in Tzfat, and yet the Jews are victorious. The Arabs flee from Tzfat, and the Arab area in the 50s becomes an artist quarter. Okay, so this is all the old city. We are going to be visiting virtually. Okay, we're going to be visiting a few places. We're going to go to the cemetery. Okay. Cemetery, near it is the ARI Mikvah and the ARI Ashkenazi Synagogue, also down here, not on this map. Okay, those are some of the oldest things in Tzfat. We're going to take a look at the Red Mosque or the Red Khan, right? One of the remainders of the Mamluk presence in Tzfat. And we're going to take a look at some of the synagogues, the Abohav, the ARI. We're going to see the fortress all the way at the top of the hill here. One of the things you can't tell from this map, this is the top of the hill, this is the bottom of the hill. Don't go to Tzfat if you don't like stairs, right? Tzfat is a city of not only of air, but also of stairs, right? So we're going to be in this Crusader and then Mamluk fortress that's up here, okay? Those are the basic places we are going to be visiting, okay? So that's just to give us a sense of where we're going to be. Okay, so let's carry on. Let's continue. We might come back to this map later, but let's continue. Okay, so this is, I bring this into a lot of my Zoom talks just because I love it. This is a great map. Do not use this map to get from place to place. This is not a good driving map, right? But it is a really great map to understand something that was very significant to medieval Jews. Okay, for medieval Jews, they're what are known as the four holy cities. Now, you'll look at this map and you'll say, what are you talking about? There's plenty of other holy cities, Shiloh, Beit El, Shrem, right? This talks about four holy cities. Let's show them on the map. Okay, we've got Tzfat, of course. Okay, we've got Jerusalem, we've got Hebron, and we've got Tiberias. And you say, Tiberias, really? Tzfat, really, right? If we go back to biblical times, these are not the holy cities, Jerusalem and Hebron. Okay, nobody's arguing with them, but we would definitely include other ones. Why these four? Because these are the four cities that had a continuous, not continuous, right? The Crusaders come, they kick the Jews out, but Jews kept returning to these cities. So if you came to the land of Israel in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, these are the cities that Jews are living in. Okay, so they become known as the four holy cities. And one nice way of thinking about them is to connect them to what medieval people and even earlier, right, the Greeks talked about the world as being made up of four elements. Okay, you know these four elements if you are a big fan of 70s rock groups, right? Earth, wind, fire, and air. No, did I say that right? Earth, wind, air, and fire. No, earth, wind, water, and fire. Okay, where did water go in earth, wind, and fire? I don't know. He was out taking drugs somewhere. Okay, but you have four elements: earth, air, water, fire. Each one corresponds to a city. Okay, so Tveria, Tiberias, very easy. On the Sea of Galilee, water, right? Hebron, place of the burial of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, the first purchase of land by a Jew in the land of Israel. So that's earth. So we've got water, we've got earth. Jerusalem, of course, is fire, right? Fire, the temple, God's presence, which leaves us with Tzfat and air, right? I promised you we would get to the air connection. Why is Tzfat the city of air? So on a very basic level, Tzfat is the city of air because it's high up, right? It's a high elevation. You're up in the mountains. If you want to have, you can be on a summer day, you could wake up in Tiberias and you're dying, right? It's so muggy and hot and disgusting. And you get in your car and you drive 45 minutes, you're in Tzfat, it's a different world, right? It's cool. The air is nice. The air is clean, right? So there's that very basic idea. But Tzfat became a city of air in a sense of seeking, right? In the sense of spirituality, in the less nice sense that we have the same meaning of the word in English and in Yiddish, somebody who is an airhead or a Luftmensch, right? Or a head in the clouds. People of Tzfat sometimes are very like that. Right? They don't know the price of milk, but they can discuss intense Kabbalistic ideas with you for hours on end. Right? So that's Tzfat and air. So it's just kind of nice to make that connection between the elements and the cities, and that's just to give us that sense of the four holy cities. Okay, let's get into a little pre-16th century. Okay, there's very little Tzfat in biblical times. We don't know about it. We don't have archaeology that we found somewhat around Tzfat, but not really in Tzfat itself. However, fascinatingly, in medieval times, Jews and Christians and Muslims associated biblical sites that we know today were for sure in the center of the country or in the south of the country. They moved them, right? They moved them up north. Certainly Jews and Christians, the Crusaders, when they lose the kingdom of Jerusalem, like we talked about in Akko last week, they can't go to Jerusalem. Jews can't go to Jerusalem for large chunks of their history. They're living in the Galilee. So they think about the places that are important in the Bible. Joshua crossing the Jordan, right? Jacob running away and sleeping in Beit El, and they transfer them to the north. And it's a fascinating thing. So the Christians, the Crusaders, actually talk about Tzfat. They thought Tzfat was Beit El. They associated Tzfat with Beit El. They weren't too worried about facts and geography. And they said Tzfat is Beit El. And the Jews said, if Tzfat is Beit El, we know that Jacob, when he's running away from home and he's on his way to his uncle Lavan, right, he stops, according to the legends, according to the Midrash, he stops and he spends 20 years studying in the study hall of Shem and Ever. So this is according to the Midrash. It's not in the Bible, but it also isn't in Tzfat, right? So there's a synagogue in Tzfat called Beit Knesset Shem Va'ever, right? And we have all kinds of strange connections. Joseph's pit, right, where the brothers throw Joseph into the pit. They put this here. They put it up in the north. There's an order of nuns called the Daughters of Jacob because they believe that Jacob is up here. Okay, all these things don't fit with geographic archaeology reality, but in historical imagination, they're put here. And that's, I think, a fascinating thing. So for the Crusaders, Kever Rachel, Becky says, that's interesting. Kever Rachel does not get, as far as I know, does not get a northern designation, but that's a very interesting question. I would have to ask around. I don't know about it, but it's an interesting idea. Okay. The Crusaders, right? Crusaders, spent a lot of time on them last week. The Crusaders come to Tzfat not only because they associate biblical traditions with Tzfat, that certainly is important, and religion is definitely very much a part of the whole story of the Crusaders coming to the land of Israel, but it's not only. Tzfat is a very strategic place on the eastern side of the country. It's very high up. You can control a huge area. So already in 1102, right, very soon after the Crusaders first make it to the land of Israel, they come to Tzfat and they build a massive fortress. Right? It's destroyed in 1220. In 1240, they come back and they build an even larger fortress, and it's the largest fortress in the Middle East. Okay, the fortress, which very little of it exists anymore today, we'll see pictures in a minute, but its very building impacts on the structure of the city up until today. What do I mean by that? And you could take a look at this map. This is actually very helpful, even though it looks like a blob. Okay, in the center over here, this is the actual fortress. And there's a moat around the fortress. And then there's another moat around the fortress. There are concentric circles and walls that are in the top, at the very top of the hill in Tzfat. And A, this makes the city safe. And B, when people come and decide to live here because the city is safe, nobody goes near the fortress. They start to build from the bottom of the hill and they build their way up. Now, once the fortress is gone, the fortress might be gone, but the underlying infrastructure is still around. And the moats of the city become the main streets of the city. If you've ever driven around in the old city of Tzfat, right? It can be, I once stayed in Tzfat and I asked my hosts, how do I get out of here? And the woman who I was staying at, she said, pretend you're a ball and just keep on rolling down, right? And that's basically what it is. The city, the streets just kind of go circular, down, down, down. That's because they're built on the remains of these moats, right? And in order to get anywhere in Tzfat, you're always, if you're driving, you're always going in circles. If you're walking, you're always climbing upstairs, right? But if you're driving, you're always going in circles. So the Crusaders build this massive fortress. The fortress is conquered by Baibars, by the Mamluk Sultan. We'll get to him in a minute. And he builds an even bigger fortress, right? He builds an even bigger fortress. A, because it's useful to him. These are the remains of the fortress, which was ultimately destroyed in one of the earthquakes in Tzfat. Okay, so there's not much left, although you can climb to the top of the hill and you can see what's left. But Baibars comes along. He conquers all the land of Israel from the Crusaders. His symbol, the meaning of his name is a panther. His symbol is a panther. We have his panthers on the misnamed Lion's Gate in Jerusalem and in other places. And he built his fortress to be even bigger, first of all, because mine is bigger than yours. And this shows that we are in control. The Mamluks are in control and they've kicked out the Crusaders, but also because, as we said, Tzfat is a super significant site. The Mamluks destroy the coast. Their power is inland. So Tzfat controls the whole area from the Kinneret through the Transjordan, all the way out to the Mediterranean. And Baibars and his power in Tzfat, right? The Mamluks come along and they build, right? And today in Tzfat, if you go to that side of the city that has the artist section, right, you will see that there aren't so many Mamluk buildings, but you have one of the oldest Mamluk buildings in the land of Israel, and that's this mausoleum over here on the left, right? It was, sorry, I apologize. The oldest building is the Red Khan, the Red Mosque on the right. The mausoleum is from the 14th century. The Red Khan is from the 13th century. It's from the very beginnings of the Mamluks here, 1276. It's really the beginning of Mamluk presence in the land of Israel, built as a mosque and also as a Khan, an inn. Today, it's not used as a mosque anymore. It's actually controlled by the city of Tzfat. That they rent it out for all kinds of events, but it's a very beautiful, impressive building. Now, the Mamluk presence in Tzfat actually is very good for the Jews. Right? There's a scholar named Chagi Amitzur, and he has a great YouTube lecture where he says, how does he call it exactly? He says how Baibars helped write the Shulchan Aruch. Right? It's a great name. What does it mean? Because the reason that the Jewish presence in Tzfat could grow and become so significant, and Rabbi Yosef Karo could come and live in Tzfat, is because the Mamluks made it a place that was secure, that was safe. By the time of the 16th century, it's not the Mamluks anymore, it's the Ottomans. The Mamluks lay the groundwork for this place as a safe, secure site, which also is part of an important trade route. So Tzfat becomes a major city. It becomes a real competitor to Jerusalem when Jews start coming to the land of Israel after the expulsion from Spain, okay? Which is exactly where we are going right now. Okay, so one of the most important events in early modern Jewish history, tragic event, but it has a huge impact on Jewish life all over the world, is the expulsion from Spain. Okay, Spain kicks out its Muslims under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. We all know the story, into the 15th century. And the Jews, they say, well, now that we have purified Spain from the Muslims, now let's purify it from the Jews. And the Jews are given alternatives, not very great alternatives. You can convert to Christianity or you can leave. We have historians say that their the basic division of Spanish Jewry is into three. 1/3 converts many of them remaining secret Jews, right? The story of the Conversos, the Marranos, which is now popping up. Jews like that are Christians who have a Jewish heritage are really popping up everywhere in the Southwest of the United States and in Europe and all over the place. So 1/3 converts, whether sincerely or mostly not. 1/3 die, whether by the hands of the Inquisition or attempting to leave and not succeeding, and 1/3 leave. Where do they go? So that's what's going on in the map that you have here. Okay. In the beginning, they many of them go to Portugal, where 5 years later, they don't even get a choice, but they are forced to convert. And that's a terrible, tragic story. But there are others who don't want to do anything like that. They want to go further away. Some of them head to Western Europe, which is not going to be a very great story because Western Europe also has the Inquisition and is oppressing its Jews and has already expelled Jews from many places. Some of them head to Italy, but a large number of them head to either the new areas, newly being settled areas of Eastern Europe that are welcoming the Jews, or to areas controlled by the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire, which is all this yellow that you're seeing here, the Ottoman Empire, incredibly powerful in the 15th, 16th century. And they're very happy to take the Jews because the Jews bring with them business sense, they bring with them connections, and they can help the Ottoman Empire to develop economically. Now, the Jews are thinking, okay, they're opening their places for us. We have a refuge, but not only that. Here we've gone through, we have to think like a Jew, a traditional Jew, a terrible, terrible disaster, a tragedy has happened. That means that's the birth pangs. Something terrible happens, it means the redemption is on the way. If terrible suffering is happening, there's got to be a reason for it. And that reason is because God is bringing the redemption. And what more of a sign of the redemption than the fact that we can now come to the land of Israel and live there freely as Jews. So you have a nice percentage of Jews, not huge numbers, but a very significant in who they are, who either make their way directly to the land of Israel or first go to the cities of Istanbul and of Izmir, right? The cities of the main cities of the Ottoman Empire, and from there make their way to the land of Israel. Okay? But the Spanish expulsion, you cannot underestimate how important it is for the development of Jewish community in Tzfat. Why Tzfat? Okay, so one of the reasons we said already, it's a pretty safe place to live that's got wonderful trade connections. So you can make a living, but making a living is definitely not the only reason. These are Jews who have been through terrible, terrible trauma. And as we said, they are seeking the redemption. So why aren't they going to Jerusalem? Right? So again, harder to live in Jerusalem, but Tzfat has a very deep tradition of mysticism, not Tzfat, but right next door, right across the way, just to the west of Tzfat. Stand in the old city, you can't miss it. There's Mount Meron. Mount Meron, which next Monday night is going to be packed with probably about 500,000 people. Okay? Mount Meron is the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the father of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. And how do we understand the world? That's very much a part of the story of these Jews of Tzfat. They are coming here because they believe that this is the place where the redemption is going to begin. It might continue in Jerusalem. It has to continue in Jerusalem, but it's going to start in the Galilee. And if we can be close to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the other great sages in the north, then that's the place we want to go to. And so they come to Tzfat. Now, Tzfat is a fascinating place because even though we have all these earthquakes and the city is destroyed time after time, yet the Tzfat cemetery, the ancient part of the cemetery, is one of the most important, one of the most preserved and authentic cemeteries in the land of Israel, right? Comparing perhaps only with the Mount of Olives, and perhaps I would say more than the Mount of Olives, because unlike the Mount of Olives, which was desecrated and a lot of it was destroyed, the cemetery was destroyed by the Jordanians in 1948 and subsequent years, that didn't happen in Tzfat. Okay? The Tzfat cemetery is at the bottom of the hill, so relatively unharmed by the earthquakes. And also we're talking about graves, we're not talking about buildings, so there's not much to knock down. And if you go into the cemetery in Tzfat, which is the ancient cemetery and the modern cemetery right next door, you will find some of the most important graves in the land of Israel. All of these great rabbis of the 16th century, their graves are there and they're very easy to see. So I brought you here a nice picture of the cemetery. I'll just point out two things here. Okay, two things you can see and one that you can't really see because it's where the picture is kind of being taken from. Okay, this is the ancient part of the cemetery. And remember we said the theme is blue. All right, so lots of blue. The modern cemetery is over here, a little harder to see from this picture. This building up at the top of the cemetery is the mikvah, is the traditional site of the ritual, the spring that the ARI, that Rabbi Yitzchak Luria used as a ritual bath. Up here, you can't see it because it's pretty much where the picture is being taken from. This is the oldest synagogue in Tzfat, the ARI Sfaradi, the Sephardic synagogue that is attributed to being the place where the ARI went to pray. Okay, so let's just have an understanding. We didn't talk yet about the ARI, so if you're confused, don't worry, but we will get there. Okay, but that's the cemetery, very important, very authentic cemetery. And just to give you an idea, right, this is just so wild when you see this. These graves are all together, and these are unlike a lot of graves in Israel, which are very unlikely that they really are the authentic ones. These are the real ones. And you have here in, whatever, 6 square feet, you have the greats of Tzfat, not all of them, but a lot of them. Rav Yitzchak Luria, the Ari, Rav Shlomo Alkabetz, the author of the Lecha Dodi, Rav Moshe Cordovero, the Ramach, one of the greatest of the Kabbalists, the Mabit, Rabbi Moshe Mitrani, another one of the great scholars of Tzfat. They're all here together in one place, right? And this gives us a little bit of an understanding of why we talk about 16th century Tzfat, why we say it's the golden age. You have these men who, and women too, by the way, there were women who also were part of this whole, it's a real spiritual revolution, right? These are people who are coming up with new ideas. They believe that they are on the edge of the redemption. The redemption is going to come at any moment. They are part of all kinds of societies, and this is where I'm saying the women as well, right? Societies that wake up in the middle of the night to pray and to cry so that the Messiah will come. Okay? Famous story about the Ari. One Friday afternoon, he gathers his students together. Friday afternoon, right? Late in the afternoon. He says, we're going to Jerusalem for Shabbos. Now, even today, if you were in Tzfat on a Friday afternoon and you keep Shabbat, you're not heading to Jerusalem for Shabbos on a Friday afternoon. Not a good idea. And this, of course, is in the 16th century where they're traveling on foot or on donkeys. But the Ari says, we're going. And the students say to him, okay, just let us tell our wives. And the Ari says, if you had agreed with me and gone at that moment, the Messiah would have come, right? There's this feeling in the air that any moment, the Messiah is going to come. The most famous song that comes out of Tzfat, the Lecha Dodi, is suffused with messianic expectation, right? That's what's going on here in this very small society, that its impact is going to be felt in Jewish life for centuries to come. So let's talk about a few of the people here, okay? So the Ari, okay, the Ari, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, Rabbi Yosef Karo, these are their graves, but I want to get to a little more about them before we, a few more pictures before we give their biographies. The mikvah of the Ari, okay, again, this is the bottom of the hill. This is the part of the city that survived. This is a natural spring. Today, there's a building built around it, but it used to just be a natural spring. The legend about Rabbi Yitzchak Luria is that before he died, he told his students, just bring me to the mikvah and leave me there after he's dead, and I will tovel myself. I will put myself into the mikvah. And that's the story that the students tell, that he miraculously was able to put himself into the mikvah. Today, the Ari mikvah it's very male only. I've never been inside, off limits to women, but men come really from all over the place to immerse themselves because they see it as really a holy place, and spiritual seekers come, and people come to be part of this idea of the mikvah. Right above the mikvah is the Sephardic synagogue. This is a synagogue that goes back to Mamluk times, before the time period of the Ari. Inside, it's a beautiful synagogue, right? Inside, you can see the Aron Kodesh, the holy arks, but inside there's also a little kind of an alcove. And the tradition is that this is where the Ari sat and studied Torah with Eliyahu Hanavi. with Elijah the prophet. Okay, so who is this Ari? We keep talking about him. At the top of the hill, you have a second synagogue, right? Rabbi Yitzchak is important enough that he gets two synagogues. This is called the ARI Ashkenazi, even though it's also designed as a Sephardic synagogue. So who are we talking about? Who is the ARI? So the ARI, which is an acronym for Adonenu, our master, Rabbi Isaac, Rabbi Yitzchak. Okay, this is someone named Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. He's born in 1534 in Jerusalem. He's not born in Tzfat. He's born in Jerusalem. His father dies soon after he's born. His mother is a widow. It's very hard to raise him. She takes him to Egypt, to where they have relatives, and he grows up in Egypt, and he's a very, very bright young man. Okay, he's born in 1534. He goes down to Egypt. He's a very bright young man. He studies Torah. According to legend, he does not study mysticism because traditionally Jews didn't study. That wasn't what you studied as a young person. You studied Torah. You studied mostly Gemara, Halacha. You didn't study mysticism. One day, according to the story, he's in the synagogue and a man comes in, one of these recent converts to Christianity who have managed to escape from Spain and makes his way to Egypt, but he doesn't know very much. He was brought up as a Christian. And he comes into the synagogue and he says to the Ari, he brings him a book. He's holding it upside down. He says, "Can you show me? I don't know how to pray." And the Ari takes the book, and it's not a siddur, it's not a prayer book, but it's a book of the Zohar, right? The seminal text of Jewish mysticism. And from that point on, the Ari begins to study Jewish mysticism. He becomes immersed in it. And, just like you live in Montana, but you want to make it as a star on Broadway, you got to leave and you got to go to New York. If you're a mystic, you're picking yourself up from Egypt, you're making your way to Tzfat because that's where the greatest mystics of the day are. And the Ari picks himself up. He's not yet 40 years old, right? And he makes his way to Tzfat in 1569. Okay, he's born in 1534. So he is 35 years old, right? Did that math right? Comes to Tzfat. He lives in Tzfat for 2.5 years. In 1572, he dies. He dies before he's 40, right? But in that 2.5 years, he manages to revolutionize the study of mysticism and to attract around him a whole group of students. Now, these students have a great name. He's known as the Ari, right? What's Ari in Hebrew? It means a lion. His students are known as the Gurei Ha'ari, the lion cubs. Okay? And they are very, very loyal to him, and they study with him. Now, he studies mysticism, Jewish mysticism, which of course is about, it's like I understand what it's talking about, right? I'm not a mystic. But it's trying to get to a deep understanding of the universe, of God, of God's relationship to the world. How can God be at once transcendent, right? Completely above the world and greater and more unapproachable, right? He's Malkeinu, he's our king. And yet at the same time, he's immanent. He's in the world. He's involved intricately in everything that's happening in the world. He's Avinu. He's our father, right? That contradiction, Avinu Malkeinu. He's our father. He's our king. How can he be both? That's one of the questions that Jewish mysticism, that Kabbalah tries to solve. And one of the ways they try to solve it is through this, which I assume is familiar to a lot of people. It's the tree of the Sfirot, right? The emanations of God, with the top emanation. And this is, again, very connected to this time period we're in of Sfirat HaOmer. God's Keter is the highest, the closest to God. Malchut is the one that's closest to people. And how does God emanate throughout and come down to people? And the Ari looks at this and gives new ideas, right? Very powerful new ideas. And one of the strongest of these new ideas is that God, of course, is everywhere. But in order to create the world, he has to retract. He has to take himself a little bit out of a small corner of the universe. Because if he's everywhere, he cannot create something new. And what he does is he pours his divine light into these sfirot, into these emanations. But only the first 3 of the sfirot can hold the divine light. The other ones break, and the light falls and becomes mixed up, traps inside what are called in Kabbalah the klipot. If you're not understanding this, don't worry. I'm not understanding it either. But the deep idea that's going on here that the ARI brings out is that in order to bring the redemption, every single Jew has to release these sparks of light, right? Take these sparks of light that are trapped in evil, in baseness, in bad behavior, and release them. How do you release them? By doing good in the world. And every time a Jew does one good thing, right, whatever it may be, that is releasing one spark. And so every person can be part of this redemption. That's a huge idea, because what it means is that you don't have to be a brilliant scholar or the greatest righteous person. Every act that you do brings the Messiah one step closer, right? And this kind of revolutionary idea is accompanied by revolutionary practices that we still do today, right? Including Kabbalat Shabbat, right? Going out into the fields to welcome the Sabbath Queen, that comes from Tzfat. Doing a Tu B'Shvat Seder, right? Saying that God's presence is inside the world and the fruit and the trees, that comes from Tzfat. Staying up all night on Shavuot to study, that comes from Tzfat, right? Ideas that we take for granted as, that's always been in Judaism. No, it hasn't always been in Judaism. It comes from the ARI and his Kabbalah, and it comes from Tzfat, and it radiates out towards, for good, things like Chassidut and Tikkun Olam, for bad, towards the false Messiah, Shabtai Tzvi, but all of it is coming from the ideas that are coming from Tzfat. So it's a super powerful Torah that he is teaching there, maybe a little too powerful, right? Maybe it's too intoxicating, but it's very important. To go in a different direction, we have another brilliant mind who comes, Rabbi Yosef Karo, has a very long life. He's born in 1488. He dies in 1575. And his life kind of encapsulates this story of the Jews of Spain. He's born in Spain, 1488, 4 years old. His family has to leave. They head towards the Ottoman Empire. They head towards Turkey. He grows up there as a young man. He's a brilliant, brilliant legal scholar, but perhaps because of his early life and his recognition that so many Jews have been martyred by the Inquisition, he dreams of being a martyr. It's a very strange idea, but he dreams of dying to sanctify God's name. And he wants to be a mystic. And so he also comes to Tzfat. He's not a mystic. It's not something he's very talented at. He's incredibly talented as a halachist, as a Jewish legal scholar. And he writes a monumental work on Maimonides, right, on the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. And then he says, I'm going to write a book that's a little bit easier. It's for the masses, right? This is, before I move to the next slide, this is just a picture of the Yosef Karo Synagogue at Tzfat, one of the beautiful synagogues. Rav Yosef Karo does not ever set foot in this synagogue. It was built after the great earthquakes in the 19th century. But underneath the synagogue is a room that is traditionally considered to be the study hall of Rav Yosef Karo. So there is a connection here. But Rav Yosef Karo writes a condensed version of his great legal work that he calls the Shulchan Aruch, the set table. He says, similar to Maimonides a few centuries earlier, times are difficult. Most people don't have time to sit and study all of the legal works from the Mishnah up till the present day to understand how to behave. So I'm going to write them a handbook. I'm going to write a Judaism for Dummies. And I'm going to call it the Shulchan Aruch, the set table. So that anybody who comes along and wants to know how to keep Shabbat, how to keep Kashrut, what to do on Purim, I just open up this book. And there I have it, and it becomes an incredibly important book. Now, at the same time, far away in Poland, there's another brilliant scholar, Ashkenazi scholar. His name is Rabbi Moshe Isserles, the Ramah, and he has the same idea. Now, what do you do if you find out someone has your idea and they're also writing a book? You get to your publisher first, right? I want to get my book out before the other guy. Rabbi Moshe Isserles doesn't do that. He has a great nobility of spirit. He says, I know Rabbi Yosef Karo, he's a brilliant scholar. I can't improve on his book, but while he set the table, I am going to bring the tablecloth, right? I'm going to bring the mapah. Wherever Ashkenazi law differs from Sephardi law, I'm going to put in a note, right? How incredible is that? He won't compete with the book. He'll just add his notes to the existing book. And that's how the Shulchan Aruch becomes a book for everybody. It's the Sephardi written halacha with the Ashkenazi notations, and so everyone can use it. One last important synagogue in Tzfat, there are many synagogues in Tzfat, it is a city of synagogues, but one of the most beautiful ones is the Abohav. If you remember way back at the beginning of the class, we talked about Rabbi Abohav, who never comes to Tzfat. He lives in Toledo in Spain. He dies in 1493. He doesn't ever leave Spain. How is the synagogue here? So the story that is told by the people of Tzfat, it's a very Tzfat story. This is the inside of the Abohav. It really is the most beautiful synagogue in all of Tzfat. The story that is told is that the Abohav comes to one of the rabbis in Tzfat in a dream. And he says, my synagogue, my beautiful synagogue that I taught in, that I studied in, that I prayed in for decades has now been turned into a church, right? We know that after the expulsion, many of the synagogues in Spain and in Portugal were turned into churches. And he says, this is very heartbreaking to me. How can my synagogue be a church? And in the dream, the rabbi says to Rabbi Abohav, he says, that's very sad, but what can I do about it? He says, you Tzfat rabbis, you have powers, you figure out how to get my synagogue to Tzfat. So then he wakes up from the dream, he gathers the rabbis that night, they have a prayer session, they pray and they pray and they pray, and in the night, very great wind, and the synagogue ends up in Tzfat. Is this really true? I don't know. But I will tell you that if you go to the Abohav Synagogue, in the earthquake in the 1800s, the only wall of the synagogue that did not fall was the wall of the Ark of the Aron Kodesh. There's more than one, there's 3 arks. And in that ark, in one of the arks, is a Torah scroll that was brought from the expulsion from Spain. So could it be that this is the Abohav's Torah scroll and that's how the story grew? Maybe, but it is a very, very old Torah scroll that made it to Tzfat. Okay, today in Tzfat, one of the really great organizations that exists in Tzfat is called Livnot U'Lehibanot, to build and to be built up. This is an organization for college and post-college students to come to Israel, to travel, to study about Judaism, but not only. Part of the program is that they work. They rebuild, and in Tzfat, particularly in Tzfat, because of all the earthquakes, there's a lot to rebuild, and the value of labor and working the land. About 10 years ago, Livnot U'Lehibanot bought kind of an old broken down building that was going to become their new headquarters. And of course, they had the students come and start working on it. So once you buy a building in Tzfat and you want to rebuild, you have to do archaeological excavations. And as they excavated, they discovered a number of fascinating things. Okay, they found a mikvah, a ritual bath from the 16th century. They found a bakery from the 16th century. And they realized that they were building their new headquarters in a building that had been the headquarters of the Jewish community in the 16th century. And they called it Beit HaKahal, the community house. And you can really picture people coming on a Friday to immerse in the mikvah, to bake challah in the bakery. It's really a powerful place that you can go see today. We mentioned the Lecha Dodi, right, which I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with, the beautiful song that we sing as kind of the culmination of the Kabbalat Shabbat. One of the things that the ARI does with his students is on Friday afternoon, he has them all get ready, bathe, it's still daylight. They go out to the hills around Tzfat wearing white robes, and they physically welcome the Shabbat Queen. And this is Rav Shlomo Alkabetz writes this song to accompany that ceremony, right? And it's all about welcoming the Shabbat Queen, but it's also all about the redemption, right? Shake yourself off from the dust, put on the garments of your glory, come and draw into my soul and redeem it, right? The redemption is coming, it's here, it's on the way. Fascinatingly, by the way, Rav Shlomo Alkabetz takes a lot of verses, and they are verses that are all related to Jerusalem, and he cuts off the Jerusalem part. He doesn't talk about Jerusalem. Na'ari me'afar kumi Yerushalayim, livshi bigdei tipartech Yerushalayim. He cuts those off. because yes, we are going to get to Jerusalem first, but meanwhile, Tzfat in the Galilee, that's where the redemption is going to begin. Okay, we're going to leave the 16th century for our last few minutes and talk about more modern times. Last week, people who were with us last week, we were in Akko. We talked about the prison, the great prison of Akko, and the underground prisoners, the Jews who fought for the state, and 8 of them who were executed by the British in Akko because there was no Jewish community there. So the British thought that there would be less of an outcry if they executed them. There, they were not buried in Akko. They were brought, most of them were brought to be buried in Tzfat, and it's in that cemetery that we saw before. And there's a monument there for the Olei HaGardom. Olei HaGardom are those are people who were executed by the ruling power. So it's in Tzfat. So if you ever wondered why Tzfat, Tzfat was really the closest important Jewish community, and they were brought and they were buried there in Tzfat. And there's definitely a deep connection between the community of Tzfat and the Jews who fought to create the state. When the British take over in Tzfat with the British mandate, there is much tension between the Jewish section of Tzfat and the Arab section. As we mentioned before, by 1948, there are 12,000 Arabs in Tzfat. There are 1,200 Jews. Right? There's a lot of fighting between them. And even though that they don't live in the same place, but they're right next to each other. So one of the things the British did, and they do this in other places as well, they built a physical barrier between the two neighborhoods. And that's, if you've ever been to Tzfat, so the old city, you have seen these stairs and climbed them, waiting for them to be over, right? You can't go to Tzfat without climbing stairs. This is the main huge staircase down the middle of the old city of Tzfat, and it was built by the British to separate the two populations. At the top, it's a little hard to see it in this picture. You could definitely see it when you go to Tzfat. At the top was a building that had an enormous projector spotlight that lit this up all the time so that nobody could go from either side and attack the other part of the city. So this was meant to physically separate the Jews and the Arabs. It didn't really make a difference because on April 16th, 1948, the British leave Tzfat. They had kind of entreated the Jews to leave, to evacuate. The Jews themselves are very frightened, but they decide to hold on. The Arabs take the high points. Okay? This is the building of the police headquarters, and it seems like a lost cause for the Jews of Tzfat. But they have a few secret weapons. One is the Davidka, right? This is a memorial to the Davidka. There are a few of them in various places in Israel. The Davidka is a very, very Jewish weapon. Right? It was developed in the War of Independence. It's a weapon that makes an awful lot of noise, but doesn't really do very much harm. And it frightened the Arabs. They didn't understand what it was. They heard this huge noise. They're like, oh my God, the Jews are attacking us from all directions. Really, it didn't do much to anybody, but it gave the illusion of attacks. That was one of the secret weapons that the Jews had. The other 2 secret weapons are encapsulated in this quote that's attributed to the chief rabbi of Tzfat. Tzfat was saved because of action and because of a miracle. The action was the Jews gathering to pray. The miracle was the arrival of the Palmach. The Palmach, the elite strike forces of the Haganah, were not in Tzfat. They were on the mountain in Biria, on the mountain next door, in Har Kanan, excuse me, and they had to march all night through Arab occupied areas to get to Tzfat, but they are able to make it there, and that's one of the reasons the Jews are saved. And this is such a great picture because you have the young Palmach fighters, but you also have the old rabbis and the kids, and everybody's taking part. But the action that the Jews of Tzfat did was they went to their synagogues and they started to pray, and then they were saved by the miracle that the Palmach actually made it there. On May 10th, the Jews take off Tzfat, the Arabs flee, and Tzfat becomes a completely Jewish city. Today, Tzfat is, in terms of residences, it's a Jewish city. There is a college in Tzfat, a Michlala, that serves all of the surrounding populations, which are Jewish and Arab. There are a lot of Arab communities around Tzfat. And so if you go to Tzfat and you go near the Michlala, you will see that there are a lot of Arab students that come, but they're not living in the city. And Tzfat today, certainly in the old city, is a fascinating, if sometimes dysfunctional place, but it is filled with so much in terms of art and tourism and spirituality. And the pictures that I brought you here, we have Kabbalistic artists. We have the candles of Tzfat. The picture up here on the top left is of a beautiful, beautiful women's mikveh in Tzfat that was built as not only a functioning mikveh, but also as an education center to teach women and men about mikveh. It's meant to be kind of a counterpart to the ARI mikveh. So you really have so many things in Tzfat, and it is really a very, very beautiful place to visit, and of course to get to know the people who are there, who are very different and very interesting and unusual. So I did not see, I saw a question or two here, but from Becky, but I think we answered those. But if other people have questions or comments, please, this is for you.
Wow, Shulie, you have silenced everybody.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but it is silenced, yes.
It is so ferocious, the pace. It's amazing. I had no idea. I knew parts of that. I did know parts of that, certainly not all of it. And you cram in so much information. It's amazing. Randa has her hand up. Yes, Randa.
Have to unmute. I have a simple question. The blue
Sure.
at the grave sites was it originally a dye of some type, and is it now just maintained by paint every year?
Well, the blue for the tchelet, right, for the ritual fringes, that
Right.
has to be a very specific kind of dye.
Right.
This is just paint. And most of it, by the way, just having been visiting Tzfat over the years, there's a lot more blue than there used to be. Right, because it's pretty, it's very photogenic. People are definitely painting more blue than there used to be. But on the graves and things like that, it's just paint. It's not any special kind of dye.
So the original graves from the 1600s did not have the blue. Is that correct?
Probably not. I mean, we obviously have no photographs. When did we start seeing the first blue on the graves? It's a very interesting question. You have to look back at old pictures of Tzfat. If we, the oldest color pictures, which is not so long ago. So that I don't know, but my gut feeling is that it's a relatively recent thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Rabbi Fishman, where are we going next week?
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Next week.
I have to remember. You remember better than me.
No, I have it written down. Next week, we are going to Hebron and Gush Etzion.
Okay, come to that, everybody. It's my favorite place to talk about because I live here.
I live there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Shulie. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
And please join and invite friends.
We look forward to resuming once again on Thursday of next week. Have a great day, everybody. And I wish
Thank
all
you,
an early
everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Happy
Shalom.
Lag BaOmer.
Thank you, Shulie. Nachon. Happy Lag BaOmer.
Bye-bye.